is like Dungeons and Dragons, which
Yeah,
I've never.
it is.
Yeah,
It's building a party, right? It's building a
yeah,
balanced party and making sure that people have enough overlap, right? Because you need people to be able to understand each other and be able to operate in each other's spheres a little bit, but still specialized enough that you're getting the benefit of people who truly know their expertise and also just bring a different perspectives.
Welcome back. In this episode, we get to hear from Derlen Chiu, who's the VP of Product at April. Derlen shares his personal journey of transitioning from finance to tech and how he leverages his experience to foster a user-centered approach in a B2B to C business model. One of the most interesting challenges he talks about is figuring out how to influence the end consumer's experience through designing an experience for an accountant at an accounting firm. Additionally, he discusses the importance of cross-functional collaboration within the product management and design teams. This is an important topic to me. Being a designer, a lot of my focus on the podcast is figuring out how product management and product design teams could work together better. So I found this part of the interview very helpful for my day-to-day work. We discussed the road trip metaphor to help us understand the roles within a product team and who drives what and when. So without further ado, let's welcome Derlen to the show and hear more of his valuable insights. Welcome to The Way of Product. I'm your host, Cagan, and this podcast is for product professionals who eventually want to run their own product org one day. The average tenure of a product leader is 2 years. 2 years because they fail to make an impact with their teams. I want to figure out how the best product teams and creative technologists tick, with the goal of putting it all into a book. And I want to document the progress and behind the scenes with you as I write it in the coming years. Do you want to get the book for free? Then jump over to wayofproduct.com, subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll send you a draft of the book's introduction in a public Google Doc. So if you've benefited from this show in any way, if you enjoy your work more, you got unblocked from limiting belief, go to wayofproduct.com, show some love, and join the newsletter crew. I appreciate it, and I promise to continue to make the show and newsletter more and more valuable as the years go on. Now, let's get back to the good stuff. Thanks for hanging out.
All right, listener, today my guest is Derlen Chiu. He's the VP of Product at April. Derlen, welcome to the show.
Hey, Caden. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
Can you just briefly introduce yourself to the listener and we'll get started on the conversation. I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Derlen Chiu, I'm VP of Product of April. We're just really quickly, we're a B2B tax company, and we help partners really help their users estimate, optimize, and file their taxes, primarily through embedded experiences. So we have a kind of B2B to C angle. Yeah, quickly about my role at April, right? And a little bit of a lead into kind of how I think about product is I really see myself as balancing between us as an organization, as a product team, really always learning about the market, about the end user, about our partners, all of that. And then just making sure we're really, really disciplined, right? About how do we think about the market and then make sure we're keeping ourselves accountable to deliver things for our customers, for the rest of the organization, to support them, that kind of thing. Me personally, when I think about my path to where I am, I think every product manager, product leader nobody started out in product, right? Like product as a role did not really exist 10, 15 years before. For me, it was no different. The beginning of my career was actually more financial based. And when I think back about how I got to here really and my journey into product, right? Like I like to think about what motivated me to make each step and really just like this overall arc. And I like to ask myself about motivation, and I also ask people I interview. And for me, the motivation that I see of what really makes my brain work, what drives me to and what has led me to product, right, is really this desire for discovery, right, of looking at something. It could be a market, a product, or a competition, or something like that, and really trying to discover some of these hidden structures, right, of whether it's like on a feature, like, maybe an interaction with the user or something like that, or a market, like what is an opportunity there, right? And that's something that drives me. So I've been doing product for about 10 years now. It's always primarily been in fintech, always primarily early stage, and this combo of building the product while also building the team at the same time, which is and a fun balance and can be chaotic, but very, very rewarding. And yeah, I've found this theme for myself, right? Always discovering, always trying to figure things out. First half of my career was, I mentioned, from the financial realm. I was working in investments, and there was still discovery there, right? It was discovering, I was analyzing companies and trying to discover what made them tick, what made them build a product a certain way, how do they rank versus competition, what was their market, how are they performing, and if they were performing or not, why. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, how I think.
Well, researching this interview, I looked at your LinkedIn, which is usually the first stop in the professional sphere.
Yeah, I think everywhere.
And I was looking at the job titles earlier in your career, and it just says product. Can you tell me a little bit more about your rationale about just saying product? Like, I did product at this company.
Yeah, I think that connects a lot with the stage, right? I think what you see a lot is that the role of product changes very drastically across markets, across companies, and across kind of individual products, right? I think for me specifically, because I always had this divide between, not a divide, but this dual role of being a product manager, more IC focused, of doing individual work and really trying to get product off the ground, as well as being a hiring manager and building out the team. That was just a necessity of the organization, and really the challenge, right? Of you need to get a product out and deliver that meets customer needs and has all the challenges of delivery that goes with it, while also thinking about how to structure the team and all of that. So I think to encompass that role, it's difficult for me if I say product manager or something like that, right? Because the challenge morphs over time and for the stage of the company. So
Yeah, well, that's funny because I feel a very similar way about like my job title and like the responsibilities. I used to say product design, UX design, and then eventually I just do design and I use the toolbox. And then my day-to-day changes depending on what the org needs. And so sometimes I will just be, I gotta be an experienced architect and work with a couple senior designers to help coordinate like a very comprehensive overhaul of big fulfillment process. And I need to make sure all the trains are running and that they have the requirements properly framed, obviously from like product management, but you translate it into like design brief to help them understand like where everything fits and like doing service blueprints. And then other times, it's service design.
yeah,
And which is more about working with biz ops and operation. And so, it's like if you get too granular on the title, I think the more senior you get, it's just more of you've kind of mastered all the different like techniques and toolbox, like technical stuff. And you just need to know, okay, this is a service design problem, or this is a operations problem or a data problem. And then you get the right people around the problem and adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. I've found the same thing and had this exact same thought, right? Of when the challenge either becomes large enough or early enough, it's really about figuring out what game you're playing, right? What game or what is this particular type of challenge? And then it gives you some bearing at least, right? Of, okay, what's the skill sets am I bringing as a individual contributor? And if I'm playing product manager to it, or on a larger team, who fits that? Who's most appropriate for, this is an extremely UI heavy challenge. We definitely need a designer. We need a product manager to guide them, and maybe some subject matter expert or something like that. And I find that kind of categorization, it's not perfect, right? Because you still have imperfect information for a lot of situations, but it helps you at least find an initial way to approach a challenge. So yeah, it's that's some of the reasoning back there.
Tell me a little bit more about that phrase, define what game we're playing.
It's close. It's what you were saying before, right? Of if you can know what factors you're competing on, right? For for the market that you're working in, I think that helps a lot to reduce like uncertainty about, it's kind of I forgot the exact phrase, but it's something about the blank page and not knowing where to start. And if you have a little bit of definition, or at least an initial hypothesis, right? Which is how we try and operate within April, an initial hypothesis that it could be wrong, but it gives you at least a starting point to test against, right? Of saying, we believe that users will benefit from this feature that is going to save them time on such and such, right? And maybe you find out that it's not actually save time that they care about. Maybe it's something that they care more about, trust in the product or anything like that. Like gives you a starting point to move from. And I think a feature is probably a feature level hypothesis, right? Is one that most people listening to this podcast will be familiar with. But I think you have something at the strategy level too, right? Of a hypothesis around, oh, these types of customers in the market are significant, and this is the product that addresses their need, and let's go and find data as cheaply as possible to try and test this, and let's adjust, right? That kind of thing. And the games comment, right? I think they're, as you zoom out, right, like a similar challenge. And this goes back to what we were talking about, right? Of product managers changing in roles across companies, but they bring similar skills. They kind of a toolbox of skills that for different industries translates, right? Like, for example, if we're talking about a SaaS product, right? A SaaS product, software as a service product, it has similarities depending on whether you're talking. Some of my background came out of data aggregation, and there are plenty of other SaaS products, but they share qualities, right? So if you can use this mental model to say, oh, a delivery model for this particular product, regardless of whether it may be in agriculture like you or a different vertical, right? Oh, the delivery for this product looks similar to a SaaS product, right? I might be delivering different data, but it seemed like it might work for this market. Gets you a little bit out of the game. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the game comment made me think about the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, where I think strategy is used very loosely and it's very ambiguous, and people use tactics and call it strategy with post-rationalization if they're lucky, right? And
yeah,
in the book, if like the listener hasn't read it yet, it basically just says, hey, what playing field are we on? Like, what game are we choosing to play?
Yep.
What are the rules of success? And sometimes when you look at like a perceived competitor, they might be playing a completely different game. They're like playing soccer and you're playing American football. And therefore, if you're playing a different game, they're not a competitor because you're not competing. Like, you're targeting different customers. Success looks different for the different company. And you can abstract it like high or low or whatever you want. But what's helped me become a better collaborator with cross-functional partners is just first starting with, I wouldn't necessarily use the terminology, but I think I might now because it seems to be a good metaphor. Is like, what's the game we're playing? What's the success metric? And I think in a lot of ways, it's admitting we don't really have a lot of data on what the game is. We have a hypothesis and we just need to test it. That's the game we're playing. And as a designer, like when I was like junior, it was like, no, go all out, make the best experience and
yeah,
stuff. But sometimes you just need to know, okay, minimum usable to just figure out if this is a good value test, if they respond to it in a good, positive way. And then I like what you said at the beginning as you're introducing yourself, that the job of product leadership is to hold themselves accountable on delivering on the promises they make instead of saying, oh, we're going to work on it later and never do it just to placate the rest of the team. Oh yeah, no, we can work on it later, but then we work on the next thing. It's holding themselves accountable to, okay, once we actually learn something, like we build, maybe we measure, usually don't learn. It's like the norm. But when you actually build, you actually measure because there's instrumentation and you learn, then like you have data to say, oh, this actually might be a valuable experience. Okay, design, go ahead, go full hog on like making it like the best experience or workflow or whatever you need it to be.
yeah, exactly. And I think I like your analogy of the playing different games or the mismatch of soccer versus American football or something like that, right? Because I think sometimes the game is, you may have correctly identified it as soccer, but you figure out the option is maybe you don't play soccer yet. Maybe you try and play it on different terms or a different field or something like that. Because there's so many divisions to markets or customers or things like that, and you can figure out, hey, this set of rules benefits me, or at least even more generically, this structure of how customers behave here or what they want is more advantageous to me. So I'm going to move over here, and over here they're playing Foursquare, right, or something like that. So yeah, I think this concept of games and meta games and figuring out where you are and figuring out what kind of advantages work for you and what advantages you have for your organization is a really big thing. And as earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time as an individual, as an individual contributor and as a PM. And now as thinking more about the team, right? It's more about how do I think about empowering other people to think this way, right? And to do this in a repeatable way to do this discovery, update the product, update for learnings, update that, and just keep doing it in a way that is driving value, really, right? It's a different challenge. It's a different thing where it's a mix of how do you communicate and stay aligned with the rest of the organization on vision and principles, and then process, right? A lot of process of between product and design, specifically for our organization, right? Design is part of the product organization, which I think is a more of an expression of kind of where we are as a company in our market. We're relatively young and we're still doing a lot of learning. And so this becomes a really, really core relationship for us of product and design being essentially tied at the hip, right? Of needing to learn this market together, needing to own the challenge together, and not still having creative tension, but making sure that everybody has the aligned goal towards the aligned product goals that you were mentioning before.
Yeah. The pairing of like product management and product design in a product org. I'd even say data science, research orgs, the bigger the company gets, there's several disciplines in the industry of like product, right? Being able to support discovery, support delivery, all that stuff. And I was talking with Nam Gerbel, he's the VP of product for Doorloop. And I was in a pretty like salty mood about, you mentioned creative tension. And I think that's a great way to describe because I think product design and product management attract a lot of go-getters that are used to driving.
Yeah.
So you're putting like two drivers in a car, like a product team. And I asked them like, well, so, you're back, most VPs of product, they usually were product managers or something like that. And I'm like, well, are you a little concerned that like you have like 4 different like job families that you're going to give preferential treatment to your job family that you came from? And because I've seen it multiple times where that's what happens because that's what the VP knows.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, I'm not a product manager anymore. I run a product org. And so like I'm there to support like everybody. And I mirror to that, like anybody in this, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think the conclusion for me is, well, no, it's like a RevOps org has closers and cold outreach people, and an engineering org has front end, back end, like all these disciplines. Like a CTO isn't like a master of all those things. They're just not like a front end engineer anymore if they're the CTO. Like they run the engineering org and they hire leadership and directors and stuff like that. It's a different game. It's a different job. And so anybody could go to head of product that didn't come from product management. I think Brian Chesky's like the poster child of a design business person that runs product. And I really liked that. And then that made me feel more comfortable. I'm like, yeah, I actually think ideally they're the same thing. I mean, it's the same like business function, right? You're figuring out what's the value prop, what do they care about, crafting the offer, and then designing the experience around how you deliver the value of that offer to them. You probably want to have those departments the job families in the same group. And so what are your thoughts on resolving the creative tension? Because my belief is that there's a lot of false beliefs causing that creative tension.
Yeah.
Like, what have you learned about that? Yeah.
I think it's healthy and it's just natural because they're distinct roles for a reason, right? Each person is really bringing their own their own expertise, right? I'm not a UX expert. I certainly have views on it, and you have opinions. Sometimes, I have opinions. Sometimes it's been driven by purely opinions. Sometimes it's driven by what I think is relevant experience. But it's not like it's natural to have these things. And my view on it is really that the way that you design for this, when I think about organization design, right, is I want these teams, right, these sub teams, these cross-functional teams, the product managers and product designers, I see the way as solving it as just making sure that they understand, they share the goal of making the product successful, right? And it's because it's always a mix. It's always a mix of in different times. It's a mix of X. It's a mix of business goals, right? These are the levers that you have to pull. And for different features or different products, they change at different times. It's at least these two people, right, that need to be aligned on, hey, we want the product to be successful, right? And there's some trade-offs between making it the most ultra optimized thing for the end user possible and some business goals that might be sales driven or marketing driven or in our case, partner driven, right? Since we're B2C. And I'll give you one more for our particular space, at least where we are now, we actually have a we have a third contributor to this tension that's really important for us of our tax subject matter experts, right? Because this space is very, for certain moments, can be very complex, and a PM and a designer can understand that, but they don't understand it to the level that a CPA does, right? The significance of a particular moment. And so we actually have this complexity that we also incorporate and we build process around to make sure that we're satisfying, make sure users first, end users first. Okay, business, also make sure that we're satisfying business. And now we have to also make sure that our set of requirements from, are we saying the right things? Are we pushing the right outcome for tax, that kind of thing, and satisfy that. But just because so much of that subject is also needs to be incorporated in the design, and there's so much nuance to it as well.
I recently just did a product. Well, I mean, a big part of Produce Pay is what we do is we provide financial products that are friendly to an agriculture business model, which is usually very cash strapped, low margin, right? And so the two big products are, they kind of address the two different ways you can play the game, right? What's the game we're playing, right? And they play the game of produce, right? And really it's just about getting volume up the supply chain, and the size of that volume goes up the closer it gets to a Costco. And so there's two ways to play that game. One is you buy more productive land to grow more, or you buy a product from another farm, but like lower than you in the supply chain, and then you try to do a markup to make some margin. That's the cheaper option, right? And so we have a product called QuickPay that allows you to factor shipments so that you could like aggregate supply. And then the other one is, or you could build a $3 million greenhouse to expand production, right? So a part of, and as you're probably like intuiting, it's like, okay, well then there's a need for like treasury system and automating payments and like calculating how much we need to be like sending payments, and how do we do the accounting to collect on those payments.
Yeah.
And there's tax implications, right? And then,
okay, we're going to take a quick break from our scheduled programming. If you're enjoying this podcast and you've gotten any value out of it so far, I have a special request for you. I'm currently writing a book on product team collaboration, and I want to get the message out there. So if you want to take a moment and hit subscribe in your podcast app, that would mean the world to me, and it would be super helpful in booking better guests, getting better content out there, and getting the message of this book out to more people. So whether you have to pause this podcast or you like multitasking while listening to it, just take a moment and hit subscribe on the show page and show your support. Again, thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
so in order to solve that, we did bring, I think we did the extreme example, unless this is what you do, where we actually brought in a couple of our finance team as like product manager, but like more like subject matter expert product managers into the team, where they had like the very granular expertise on what needs to be done to fill and automate payments in a way that actually helps our like accounting systems. And so, I always thought, no matter how, like I could always do enough research to like understand, but I think there's a reason there's like certifications and regulations around some of these professions we're denying software for.
Right.
Oh yeah. Like me doing like 12 weeks of research. I'm as competent as a lawyer right now.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think you've definitely hit on I want product managers to be confident, but also know when they need to draw an expert and that kind of thing, especially when it comes to regulation heavy places. So, I think we have a similar dynamic, maybe even a little bit more. We actually have sitting resident CPAs that are on our team, and they complete this triangle that we have when working on products. And we talked a little bit before about who drives, right? And for us, at least when we're talking about our filing product, that is, it's a large experience for people who have done self-prep filing. They're pretty familiar with it, and they know it's a long experience. At different points, different people drive. There are points where it's very tax content and tax logic heavy, right? And so there, design and product take more of a supportive role of how do we think about it in design systems and things to support the tax SMEs who are there playing more of a product role. They're actually designing some of our flows, designing some of those things, and we're providing a system for them to do that. And then in other areas, design is taking a front seat. There are pieces where it's pure interaction and purely about how do we want to delight the user in this moment? How do we want to optimize this? How do we want to satisfy these kinds of things? And then the product has a driving role elsewhere. But ultimately, we try and hold this group of leads, right, accountable to product success, and understanding that is again this tension, right, and hitting this sweet spot that we can make sure we're definitely end user driven, but then also we have to think of partners, right?
Sounds like a road trip model. Everyone's taking turns driving, like on the way
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah. The I want to talk a little bit more about, I guess, the heuristics of like when to switch over drivers, right? And I think a lot of that is, well, what game is the product manager playing? Because what's funny is, yeah, we have the same goal, but from a role perspective, like success looks different for each role. From an accountability perspective, in your opinion, what's the if you're if you were to use the game metaphor to no Siri, no Siri, yeah, it's okay, you don't need it. So yeah, okay. If you're to use the future me, edit that out. If you're to make a job description, but using the game metaphor, if you're describing like a board game, so this is the game of product. And so we have product managers, product designers, and engineers. And if you're a product manager, you have these stats. Like, how would you go about explaining the game of a product manager, product designer, or, and I guess whatever else, like other discipline you have in your organization, to like explain, like maybe to a new hire, like what their role is in the game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you the examples that we really use to track our development of this filing product. I think they're pretty straightforward, and I think they should be immediately apparent, right? We definitely look at conversion, right? Because like I mentioned before, filing, as part of our core thesis, and I'd love to go on this too a little bit to zoom out when we go there, of part of our core thesis is obviously that tax filing is a very arduous process, right? And there are certain expectations from taxpayers right now about how that works and things like that, and frustrations. And so we broadly use conversion as a proxy for that, and pretty understandable goal. And that one I think is pretty easy to understand as shared between product and design. One that product tends to be more accountable for is our metrics with partners of utilization, any revenue, and making sure that those kind of more common business metrics are that we're hitting there. And then the one I think that would be new here would be for tax, right? For our tax SMEs, tax products, the actual performance of the product in terms of sound calculation, accuracy, and making sure that we are delivering the quantitative portion or calculation portion of the product, since that really is key. So it doesn't break completely cleanly, but you can see a little bit of design primarily being responsible for experience, conversion, all those things of when you as a taxpayer are in there, making sure that one, we're helping you to finish the journey. There are also some secondary metrics in here for now around like user delight and NPS, that kind of thing. Product broadly owning the business ones, and tax owning the actual function of it, and making sure that we are satisfying the goal of getting people through accurately, safely, and low risk kind of ways.
Yeah. So I'll add on to that. So it's, if you use like the kind of main, I guess like Marty Cagan's, maybe like the conceptual standard of like what I'll use the Marty Cagan model, SVPG group, where product is on the hook. Like when he says, well, when I go consult and I like look at a product team, if the metrics are down on the business metrics or like sales, like we're not converting sales because no one seems to care about this offer, I'll go to the product manager, be like, what happened? And if the conversion rates are down, or like basically the ability to complete a task, usability is down, I'll go to the product designer and say, well, and then if it doesn't work and it's buggy, it's like you go to the engineering, what happened? And like I think what I've noticed is that when it's time for me to drive as a designer, and right, it's also like you have to like turn it on and off, right? Where it's like, yeah, turn on, okay, I need to push here, right? Because the goal is efficiency or something like that. The goal is try to figure out like intuitiveness and stuff. I turn it on and I push a little bit more. And where I've really failed in my career is I always feel like I have to be pushing all the time because I'm a go-getter with ADHD. Apparently that's why. About learning to be like, oh no, the goal here is to set up like business SOPs and kind of test if a new process and system will work. Yeah, like I need to advise, But like I need to stick back, but I need to let the product manager figure out what success looks like first and let them drive, right? Because my job is to support the product manager. Well, in that scenario, my job is to support the product manager until they feel like confident enough to commit to a bigger bet. And then when that happens, work towards making that bet as successful as possible. And then there's the obvious like artifacts, right? The product manager is like, eventually has to be like, what are we doing and in what order and why? And then the designer has to be like, okay, how are we going to do what from like a customer facing lens? Like, how's the customer going to get value from this and why? And why? So it's like a type of how. And then the engineer is like, how are we going to do it and when? Because we have engineering resources, blocks and everything like that. For me, I feel like that's what the game is for each one, or at least like the collective game and the roles in the game. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, which I've never.
It is.
Yeah.
It's building a party, right? It's building a balanced party and making sure that people have enough overlap, right? Because you need people to be able to understand each other and be able to operate in each other's spheres a little bit, but still specialized enough that you're getting the benefit of people who truly know their expertise and also just bring a different perspective. So yeah, I think that's definitely our structure. And that's how I've thought about product and our entire product career. Mm-hmm. And I think where we have a really interesting challenge, right? If I were to zoom out a bit, right? Like we have this challenge between competing on the, I'm not competing so much as, again, zooming out to this larger game, right? Of looking at the product level game, like, okay, we want to compete in tax filing, right? This is a known market, right? I don't know if you would characterize it as mature in the US, but it certainly has its known incumbents. And there's a certain way that the US taxpayer knows that and is trained to think about that. And if we zoom out kind of this larger that we're thinking about, we're thinking about, okay, how do we attack this? How do we actually enter this market? And it becomes a design and product challenge, right? It's a big one to think larger of like actually strategic design, right? Not even just product design, or maybe it is. I don't know.
I guess it depends on the game, right?
Exactly.
Game, right?
So you get this larger strategic.
Yeah,
you get to this larger strategic challenge, right? Of when we look at the tax market, right? Filing is the way it is, and it's trained U.S. consumers to be very retroactive about taxes, right? To think about, taxes is a pain. They're always going to be a pain, but they are a pain that I do once a year. And I look back on all my things for this past year, and if I put numbers in here, that's it, right? And one of our top level hypotheses, right, is it shouldn't be that way. It should be planning forward, right? It should be you think about the actions you're going to do, or you get advice on, I am going to sell this house, or I am going to invest this way, or change my bank, or something like that, with the knowledge of what tax consequences or tax implications, or how that changes your situation. And one of our hypothesis around that is that user experience is very important, right? Because that's one of the ways that people are actually going to engage with it. But then being partner driven as opposed to being a direct consumer, all these other methods. So back to that multiple levels of the game and kind of figuring out how you want to play it, kind of thing.
So I really love that. And then also it just sounds like just like outside perspective from April, it's the business model, right? Because how you're delivering to customers is through APAs. And so you're not thinking about making ads directly to customers to do product growth, like growth marketing, stuff like that. You're like, I know that TurboTax has like their own people feature, but you're more of like an Airbnb where you're giving people access to a service that's done by a third party. It's not an April employee, right?
Yeah.
And you're just creating the application layer on top of it. And so like the game you're playing is like, how does someone access that service and interface with their CPA? Right. Yep. And then you're probably thinking about like SOPs and policies and like designing the product to prevent bad behavior or manipulative behavior or unethical. Well, I guess just in general, like unethical behavior on the CPAs, like CPA can use the software potentially to manipulate them. So you have to think about that risk. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. The broadly, right, our partners, CPA is one channel for us, right? Like we engage with a number of different types of partners. Actually, we have quite decent traction in the fintech space of working through like neobanks and all the fintech apps that are in the news and word of mouth are quite popular, traditional financial institutions and that kind of thing. And really just even more broadly bringing the capability of being able to engage with their existing customers around tax of, hey, you bank here, we could do your taxes for you and have all the benefits of integrating with that. And then, we also offer financial plan that dovetails with tax as well, right? So it's part of this set of financial capabilities. So you really got to the core of it, right? This is a different distribution model, right? It's the two levers we pull on, right? Of we think user experience is extremely important, right? Because that's part of the differentiating value. And we spend a lot of time designing that, of course. But then the design also comes into, all right, if we want to engage with these fintech partners who are very technically savvy and they want to embed this into their apps and they want to do that, what are the, not just the features of like, how do they embed it, but then what are we have to go to the level where design is thinking about, okay, what are the types of data that we need to provide, right? What do we need to provide to a partner that's putting this into an app versus what are the ones that we keep in our experience? How do we split that so it's cohesive and not just it's not just a simple referral out of going somewhere. It's trying to make it so that when, bank partner here is saying, file your taxes, we're sharing information with them to make the experience enticing and that they can keep the user informed on their side, but then sending them to us. So that's becomes the kind of really interesting larger design challenge because that starts getting into strategic design and thinking about, okay, we have these types of partners here, they engage in different ways, so the delivery model changes. Right now you can even start thinking about AI and more technical tools in addition to experience. So
Yeah. So like at Produce Pay, it's very similar. I think like for a little while, this is like a past product group. And when you hear like a marketplace model, you just think, oh, well, you just need to make a website and then have buyers and sellers, blah, blah. And
right.
But the actual like problem space of like agriculture it's very relationship focused, and they already have systems that in place to help develop those relationships. It's trade shows, and so produce trade shows are known to be like probably like one of the warmest type of trade show, most proactive trade show where all these agriculture companies get together and develop strong relationships and do activities that develop like trust, right? Because it's such a high risk, low margin business model. And so trying to just replace that with that Uber or DoorDash like interface from the get go, like I mean, spoiler alert, we found out that distribution model does not work. I mean, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's product. That's product.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how you learn, right? Now like learning that kind of similar to April, where we actually provide SaaS-like service to like medium sized to large distributors. And then the end customer is the grower. And then the mission of the company is to make the lives of growers better and give them fair terms and transparency in the supply chain, because that's where a lot of the manipulation and I guess unethical behavior happens. Right. Is that they just don't see like what the distributor is doing with their product. They could just be like, oh, 25% of this is bad. And it's like, well, do you have any proofs? And it's like, no, I'm not paying you the whole price.
Yeah.
And they take on all the risks. They pay all the expenses to produce like our food. And so we're like, okay, cool. If we could control the experience of how these distributors interface with growers, well, one, it's a growth model. Like they'll bring the growers with us. And I learned that I'm doing like a customer interview tour in Mexico last year. They'll bring the growers to us. We don't have to like market directly to the growers. You just have to build tooling and stuff that makes the experience of how they do business with the growers more ethical. And you make the tools so good that they would be going back to the Stone Age if they didn't use your tools and your products. I mean, I guess like the financial products is kind of like the hook, right?
Yeah.
And by doing so, then you start getting like the data needed to provide transparency to the process, because as they're using the tools, they're actually like providing visibility to the grower, like where things are going, like what's the quality control? Am I getting the shaft? Like, because, you're trying to like split up and like reprice things so I don't get a good margin. Once you found that out, it was like, boom, like tons of clarity, tons of focus. And then, we focus more on like the experience as well. And so, totally interesting. Derlen, this has been a really awesome conversation, and I might be biased because it's my show, But and I realize, I always say that, but I mean, I really mean it genuinely. This really helps me out, like something that I'm just going through right now is what's the game? Okay,
Mhm.
who makes the most sense to drive? In the Dungeons and Dragons party, do we want you want the wizard, like the designer to go first and do a spell? The idea that, just define what the problem is and like the game you're going to play around that problem. And I think it's really clear. Oh, you go ahead. You figure this out. Okay, cool. And then when you figure it out and you're confident, okay, then I'll drive to make sure that we get to that objective. And yeah, I really appreciate your candor, your thoughtfulness, and your answers. Is there anything else, like any loose ends in this conversation that you feel like was like unsaid or like like a loop you want to close before we sign off?
I think for what we talked about, I think we closed it off pretty well. And yeah, the Dungeons and Dragons thing, I think is a fun thing I'm going to take away. Maybe I'll try it with the team. Yeah, I think if I were to have a closing thought, it's really, this is product and design partnership, right? Especially in the early stage is really, I think sometimes people can get focused on building and trying to do that so much when I really view it as if you can structure how you work together and how you structure a team and make sure that you're thinking about how you are gathering information and being aligned there, that really helps to give a lot of structure to that process and helps you build. I think you can build, and by trial and error, maybe you probably get to an outcome, but maybe a little bit more structure can accelerate you further. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're a Microsoft or a Google, you can afford to lose a lot. So
right, exactly.
the startup, you get exited. But anyways, yeah, Derlen, thank you so much for coming on the show. You have a good one.
Yep. You too. Thank you, Caden.
Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download. Is everyone gone yet? Because this next offer is for you. And this is because you listened all the way to the end of this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by Alchemy, a name you might not be familiar with yet, but one you'll definitely want to remember. I don't know about you, but most meetings are terrible. Long circular discussions, weeks with no progress. I was tired of that. Tired of good energy getting sucked out of potentially explosive creative sessions. So I finally decided to do something about it. That's why I started Alchemy. Think of Alchemy as a special ops for team collaboration. We're the ones you call for remote or on-site workshops where you need to get your product team aligned and moving without the usual drag. No more endless circles or feeling like you're herding cats. I've been there. I've been stuck in the muck of misalignment, watching the clock while creativity just fizzles out. That's not how breakthroughs happen. Alchemy workshops are built differently. They are the cure to the common meeting. And because I believe in the power of what we're doing, I'm offering something special to Way of Product listeners. If your team's feeling stuck, let's talk. I'm opening my calendar for free 25-minute coaching calls to audit your team's collaboration issues. We'll dissect the problem areas, and I'll share techniques and tactics tailored to your situation to help you get unblocked and back in the flow. Think of it as a turbo boost for your team's productivity. So here's what you do. Visit wayofproduct.com/workshops. Get all the details, sign up for your free coaching call, and let's start turning those meeting groans into high fives. All right. Thanks for listening to the full episode. And remember, with Alchemy, it's not just a meeting, it's a turning point. Talk to you soon.